A folded piece of notebook paper, creased so many times, the center had gone soft. Changed everything about the way Steve Harvey understood his job. A 9-year-old boy named Isaiah Carter had carried it in the front pocket of his khaki pants for 6 days before he worked up the nerve to hand it over. He had folded it himself, 4 folds, tight corners, and he had carried it through the school week and the drive to Los Angeles and the green room wait and the first 20 minutes of the taping. His hand going to his pocket every few minutes to make sure it was still there. When Steve Harvey crouched down between rounds to say something to the kids in the front audience row, a habit he had, working the crowd, keeping energy up, Isaiah Carter stood up from his seat, reached into his pocket, and held the note out with both hands. Steve Harvey took it the way you take something from a child. Automatically, warmly, with the expectation of a drawing or a joke. He unfolded it. He read it. The reading took 11 seconds. When he looked up, his face had changed completely. He stood. He walked to the side of the stage. He sat down on the steps that led to the backstage corridor. He did not say a single word. A producer came to the edge of the stage. Steve Harvey held up one hand, flat, still, and the producer stopped. The audience waited. The cameras kept rolling because nobody had told them to stop, and the director in the booth later said she could not have stopped them if she tried, because what was happening on that stage was not something you interrupted. It was June 7th, 2016, and that note contained 9 words that Steve Harvey has never read aloud in public. Not once, not in any interview, any special, any retrospective. Ea said only this: "It was the truest thing anyone has ever handed me." The Carter family from Memphis, Tennessee had made the show through a church group referral. Isaiah's mother, Renata Carter, was 34, a licensed practical nurse working the overnight shift at a Memphis hospital 4 nights a week. She had raised Isaiah alone since he was 3 years old, when his father Marcus had left. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that made a story, just in the slow way some people leave, until one day the leaving was complete and permanent. There had been no custody arrangement, no child support order that held, no reliable number. Renata had filed twice through the state and received 2 different pieces of paper telling her 2 different things in language designed, it seemed, to make the process take as long as the need. She had stopped filing. She had gone back to work instead. By the time Isaiah was 9, Renata had built a life that functioned on precision and discipline. She meal prepped on Sundays. She slept from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. On-air overnight days so she could be awake for Isaiah's after-school window. She tracked her budget in a spiral notebook with categories so specific they included a line for Isaiah's school pictures and a line for Isaiah's school pictures if they won a package. She was the kind of woman whose competence looked effortless from the outside because she had worked at it until the seams didn't show. Isaiah was quiet the way some children are quiet. Not shy, not unhappy, but internally organized, processing more than he expressed. His teachers noted it. His third-grade teacher had written in a conference, "Isaiah is one of the most thoughtful students I've had. He listens to everything. He misses nothing." He had a habit of watching adults' faces the way his mother watched her budget, systematically looking for the gaps. He had been watching Steve Harvey on television for 2 years, not casually, with attention. He had watched the same clips multiple times. He had noticed things. Nobody in that studio knew what he had noticed. Renata had worked the overnight shift the night before the taping. She had driven home at 7:15 a.m., slept for 3 hours, gotten up, packed Isaiah's bag, and driven to the airport with her sister Denise and Denise's husband and their 2 kids, who rounded out the 5-person family group. She had done this on 3 hours of sleep and had not mentioned it to anyone. On the plane, Isaiah had sat next to her and colored. And at one point, she had fallen asleep in her seat, with her head tipped slightly back, and Isaiah had looked at her face for a long moment, and then gone back to his coloring. He had been doing that his whole life, watching his mother rest when she didn't know he was watching, the way you check something you love to make sure it is still there. He had written the note 4 days before the taping, on a Tuesday night after his mother had left for her shift. He had sat at the kitchen table with a piece of notebook paper and a pencil. He had written it, read it, folded it. He had not shown anyone. But nobody in that audience knew what Isaiah Carter had been sitting with for 6 days. Renata did not know the note existed. She did not know her son had been carrying something in his pocket since Tuesday. She did not know that the reason he had asked her, twice, in the week before the taping, whether Steve Harvey was a good person, not famous, not funny, not rich, but good, was because he was deciding whether to hand it over. The night before the taping, Isaiah had stood at his mother's bedroom door after she'd gone to sleep and looked at her for a long time. His aunt Denise had found him there and said, "Baby, what are you doing?" Isaiah had said, "Checking." Denise had not known what to make of that. She had put him back to bed. She had thought about it on the plane the next morning and still hadn't known. What she said next would change everything, but not how anyone expected. Actually, it was what Isaiah handed over. Steve Harvey had been mid-crouch, eye level with the front row, laughing about something with Renata's nephew, when Isaiah stood up beside him. It was 9 years old, neat khakis, a collared shirt his mother had ironed, shoes tied with a double knot she still insisted on. He said, "Mr. Harvey, I made this for you." He held out the note. Steve took it. He smiled the automatic smile. He unfolded it. He read it. 11 seconds. Then he stood up, walked to the stage steps, and sat down, and said nothing. The audience murmured and went quiet. Renata was standing at the contestant podium, and she looked at her son, and then at Steve Harvey, and then back at her son, with the focused alarm of a mother who has just realized something has happened, that she doesn't have full information about. Isaiah sat back down in his seat. He folded his hands in his lap. He waited with the patience of someone who has delivered something and is prepared to let it land. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey sat on those steps for 44 seconds. 44 seconds of national television silence, the note open in his hand, not looking at anything in particular. The floor manager's voice came through the earpiece. Steve Harvey did not respond. A second producer appeared at the wing. He held up the same flat hand. "Stay." The producer stayed. When he stood up, his face was different from how it had been all morning. Not broken, not performed, but stripped of the layer that people in his position carry as part of their job. He walked to center stage. He looked at Isaiah. He said, "Son, how old are you?" Isaiah said, 9. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. He said, "You wrote this yourself?" Isaiah said, "Yes, sir." Steve Harvey looked at the note one more time. He folded it carefully, the same 4 folds Isaiah had used, and put it in his inside jacket pocket. He straightened his jacket over it. He said, "I'm going to keep this." Then he looked at Renata Carter. He said, "Mama, can I talk to you?" Renata walked to center stage. Steve Harvey said, quietly enough that the audience leaned in, "Your son has been watching you. It says everything you do." And he wrote down what it means to him. He paused. "I can't tell you what it says because he gave it to me, but I can tell you that it is the most honest thing I have read in a very long time. And it is about you." Renata Carter's hands went to her mouth. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve Harvey said, "How long have you been doing this by yourself?" Renata said from behind her hands, "Since he was 3. Steve Harvey said, 6 years. She nodded. He sighed. "And he sees it. He has been watching you do it, and he sees it and he wrote it down so someone else would know." He turned to the audience. "This boy is 9 years old and he already understands something most grown men never learn. He sees his mother." And he wanted to make sure someone with a bigger voice said it louder. He looked down at his jacket pocket. "I am honored he picked me." It turned back to Renata. He said, "I have to tell you something, and I want you to hear it all the way." He straightened. "When I was at my lowest, no home, no money, no clear reason for the next day, I made a promise to God. I said, if you get me out of this, I will spend the rest of my life helping people who are where I was. Every platform I have ever been given, every stage I have ever stood on, has been me trying to keep that promise." He looked at Isaiah. This boy walked up to me and handed me the reason why. In no words, on a folded piece of notebook paper. His voice dropped. "You don't know what you gave me today, son. I need you to know that it goes both ways." The studio fell completely silent for the third time. Isaiah Carter looked at Steve Harvey with the careful, measuring attention he gave everything. Then he nodded once, the nod of a 9-year-old who has assessed a situation and found it resolved. Steve Harvey composed himself. He straightened his jacket again over the note. Then he turned to the production booth and said, "Get me a phone." It called Marcus Carter in 23 minutes. His team had a Memphis number in 17. When Marcus picked up, Steve Harvey did not introduce himself with warmth. He said, "My name is Steve Harvey. I'm calling from Los Angeles. I have your son Isaiah standing in front of me, and I need you to hear something." He put the phone on speaker. "Aside, Isaiah, tell your dad what you told me." Isaiah looked at the phone. He looked at Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey nodded. Isaiah sighed. "Daddy, Mama works every night so I can have everything. And she never complains. And I just want you to know she needs help. And I'm too little to help enough." The studio fell completely silent. Marcus Carter did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was altered in the way voices get when something has entered them that they did not expect and cannot immediately process. "Esaid, Isaiah, who's the name?" Isaiah said, "Yes, sir." Marcus said, "I hear you, son." Steve Harvey said, "Sir, I am not here to shame you. I am here to tell you that your 9-year-old is carrying weight that is not his to carry, and he is doing it without complaint. And that is a reflection of how his mother raised him, and also a signal that the time for absence is over. What happens next is your decision. But you made this call today. You answered. That matters. Now, do the next thing." The call lasted 4 more minutes. Nobody has ever said everything that was said. What the audience heard was enough. But Steve wasn't done. It turned back to Renata. It said, "What does Isaiah need that you haven't been able to give him?" Renata started to say, "We're fine." The 2-word wall she had built over 6 years. And Steve Harvey said gently, before she finished, "I know you're fine. I'm not asking if you're fine. I'm asking what he needs." Renata stopped. She looked at her son. She said, after a long moment, "He wants to go to science camp. There's a 2-week program at the university. It's $400 and I keep moving it to next year." Steve Harvey said, "It's this year." He turned to the booth. The producer didn't wait to be asked. Then he said, "And what do you need?" Renata looked at him like the question was in a language she had once known and had not used in a while. She sighed. I don't usually get asked that." Steve Harvey said, "I know. I'm asking." She said slowly, "I need one night where I know he's safe and I can just stop." Steve Harvey said, "Done. We're setting that up today." He looked at the full studio. He said, "There are millions of Renatos in this country, millions of women running overnight shifts, and spiral notebooks and double-knot shoes, and science camp calculations, doing all of it without asking anyone for help, because the asking dried up somewhere along the way." He paused. "And there are millions of Isaiahs watching them do it and writing it down in their hearts, even if they never fold it into a note. The children see everything. Everything. They are the truest witnesses any of us will ever have." He looked at the camera. "If your child has been watching you, hold it together. Let them see you be held sometimes too. It will not break them. It will teach them." The episode aired 2 months later. In the first 36 hours, it had been viewed 168 million times. The hashtag number, "He Sees You," became the number 1 trending phrase in 29 countries and remained in the top 10 globally for 6 days. It was adopted by single-parent advocacy organizations worldwide as a rallying phrase, appearing on murals, in fundraising campaigns, in 3 separate awareness commercials for family support nonprofits. 2 separate child development researchers cited the clip in published papers on children's emotional attunement. Marcus Carter called Renata 4 days after the episode aired. They began a structured co-parenting arrangement through a Memphis family mediation service in August of that year. Steve Harvey appeared on The Tonight Show 7 weeks later. The host asked about the note. Steve Harvey smiled and shook his head. He said, "It stays in my pocket. I've carried it since that day. There are 9 words on it that belong to me and that boy, and nobody else." The host said, "Can you tell us anything about it?" Steve Harvey said, "I can tell you it reminded me why I got off the floor of that car in 1985 and kept going. That's all I'll say." Isaiah Carter attended the university science camp that summer. He came home with a project on water filtration systems in rural communities. He presented it at his school's science fair in October and won first place. Renata took a photograph of him with the ribbon. It is on the refrigerator still. The Every Night Foundation launched in November 2016, named for the line Isaiah spoke to his father on that phone call. In its first year, it provided direct financial relief, emergency funds, camp fees, childcare gaps, utility bills, to over 800 single-parent families in 5 cities. It created a workforce support program that covered childcare costs for overnight shift workers during their sleep hours, the specific gap that no other program had addressed. The gap Renata had been filling alone for 6 years. By year 3, the program operated in 14 cities and had served over 12,000 families. Renata Carter sat on the advisory council. She ran the overnight care committee. She knew every gap in the system by name. Isaiah Carter is in middle school now. He wants to be an environmental engineer. He still watches faces the way he always has. That careful, systematic attention that his third-grade teacher once described and that has never left him. He has not asked Steve Harvey what he did with the note. He already knows. He checked. Some things are too true to say out loud. They have to be folded 4 times and carried in a pocket for 6 days and handed over by someone with less fear than the rest of us, which is to say, someone who has not yet been taught to be afraid of the truth. Isaiah Carter walked up to a man with a bigger voice and handed him 9 words and said, "Now you know. Now say it louder." That is not a small thing for a 9-year-old. That is not a small thing for anyone. If this stayed with you today, share it, because somewhere in your life there is a child watching you hold it together, and they deserve to know that someone sees you too. Subscribe, because every week we bring you the moment that changes how you look at the person sitting right next to you.